So last year, I made a video about woke fascism. You might have heard this term before, mainly used by conservatives, but basically in my video, I made the argument that liberals, the centre and the centre-right's use of identity politics was reaching its final conclusion with Israel's destruction of Gaza because they would justify what Israel were doing using identity politics. Now, we've actually seen that again recently in the UK with an Israeli football team, which is famous for having its fans riot and be insanely racist whenever they go abroad. They were banned from coming to the UK to play Aston Villa in a European game. And the whole political class were saying that the Birmingham police were anti-Semitic for this action. Any politician who actually supported the ban on the fans was actually an anti-Semite, despite the fact this fan base is known to have a far-right violent element in its fans. And they even had their derby game at the weekend against another Israeli team called off because the two sets of fans were fighting each other, right? But that shows you the absurdity of identity politics practiced by the liberal West. It's used to defend fascism. That's what it's always been used to defend. And you see that in their demonization of refugees and migrants who might come from Muslim majority countries, saying they're incompatible with our oh-so-tolerant Western values. And that's the language they're using to basically just do the worst crimes against humanity. Now, today I wanted to talk about a very specific element of that. And it's more interesting because it's leaders of far-right elements of political parties or actual fascist parties who actually pay lip service to liberal feminism. And it's not new for people in the UK especially. We see liberal feminism or like TERF feminism, trans exclusionary feminism in the UK, which happily allies itself with fascism to protect women. And I guess that's a good frame to understand this video, in that these women we're going to talk about today do recognize that they follow a tradition of many women and just societies fighting for women's equality, which have actually enabled them to become leaders of these countries in the first place. And they recognize that, while at the same time both using feminism and progressivism to attack minorities, and then also helping their fascist political parties make their countries worse for women overall. And the UK is no stranger to female prime ministers, for example. We've had 3 of them, but I don't think with Liz Truss especially, she's absolutely crazy, far right these days, Theresa May or Margaret Thatcher, they really describe themselves as any sort of liberal feminist. And I'm not saying the people we're going to talk about today are saying that, but they do talk about women's issues in a way that you can see through like the liberal feminist prism in the way the other leaders wouldn't. But I just think it's an interesting development that the language of fascism around Europe and the West, and Japan as well, because we're going to be talking about Japan today, is essentially the language of progressivism. And that's how identity politics is weaponized to do what I've been calling woke fascism. The one caveat I'll make before going forward, I've had a problem with Novara Media and Ash Sakar's use of this, where they're talking about identity politics destroying the left, which is something I actually reject. And I reject it in the British context especially. I don't think identity politics has been destroying left-wing movements around the world. I think identity politics has been weaponized by the political business elites, from liberals to conservatives, to enact fascism. That's where I differ with a lot of people who talk about identity politics negatively. I don't think politics that combine class and issues around identity, race, gender are actually bad, and I think I articulated that well enough in my video on Gary's economics. So that's just a bit of a difference of opinion I have with other people who talk about maybe identity politics in this way. So all of that coming up for you today. If you want to follow me on social media, check me out at the Kavernacle on Blue Sky and on Instagram. If you want to support my work, check out my YouTube memberships and check out my Patreon page. And if after you've watched the video you like it, please leave a like and maybe subscribe to my channel for more content. So while I'm talking about the West a lot, let's start with Japan. Now, obviously, Japan isn't the West, but it does have a relationship with the West that most other Asian countries don't really have, in the sense that, firstly, Japan in the later parts of the 19th century based its political model on Britain and Prussia. And then obviously after World War II, the American government that was occupying Japan just after the war basically designed their political system to resemble a Western one. And the party that's been in power for most of the post-war period was supported by the CIA, especially to stop communism. This party has always been like very nationalistic, maybe not in the way you can understand it in terms of maybe Western politics, but at the same time, there's different factions in the party. And Shinzo Abe represented a bit more of the far-right nationalist faction, and that faction has gained control again, and Japan is looking like it might have, likely will have, its first female prime minister. So her name is Sune Takaichi. The Guardian reported today, on course to become Japan's first female prime minister after new coalition deal. Officials confirmed on Monday that Takaichi's Liberal Democratic Party has joined forces with the right-wing Nippon Ishin, Japan's innovation party, which shares her hawkish stance on China and her support for restrictions on immigration. And she said, "I'm very much looking forward to working with you on efforts to make Japan's economy stronger and to reshape Japan as a country that can be responsible for future generations." To not get into like real details about Japanese politics, because this video isn't about this, although I was going to make a video about this back in, I think it was July. In Japan's recent election, the LDP had their like worst results in I think like 70 years. And there was a massive surge with far-right parties. So a lot of Westerners were like, oh, like, are there more far-right parties than like certain factions of the LDP? But yeah, there were more far-right parties that resembled something more fanatical, like maybe something like American Republicans, like rife with like COVID conspiracies, anti-vax, like basically that type of far-right. And basically what the LDP thought is like, it's kind of like a referendum on immigration. So Japan already has a hard stance on immigration anyway, has a well-earned reputation for being very xenophobic, and now they've decided to go in the direction of actually we need to do that even more. And Takaichi becoming like the new leader and the new prime minister is kind of them responding to that, hoping, you know, they can claw back their influence and votes. So put it like very simply. But anyway, yes, the new female prime minister, the first female prime minister of Japan, is a far-right xenophobic nationalist who is also anti-LGBT. So it seems to be the case with every new female leader these days. But anyway, an article from the Straits Times, Japan's first female PM, but Takaichi is not a feminist. She said she hopes to raise awareness about women's health struggles, and she's spoken candidly about her own experience of menopause. But despite these gestures, her policy positions on gender place her on the right of an already conservative LDP. She is against revising a 19th century law requiring married couples to share the same surname, which overwhelmingly results in women taking their husbands' names. And she also wants Japan's imperial family to stick to its male-only succession rules and is opposed to same-sex marriage. Reuters also reporting, in her campaign to become Japan's first female prime minister, she made a bold promise to narrow the country's wide gender gap in politics and lift the number of women in cabinet to a par with socially progressive Nordic countries. Now that she has shattered the glass ceiling to be chosen to be leader of the ruling party on Saturday, setting her on the course to emulate her hero Margaret Thatcher, Takaichi must try to deliver on promises her party has struggled to keep. He promises to form a cabinet with women's representation, not particularly lower than the Nordic countries. I wouldn't appoint women just because they're women, but the plan is to pick far more women who are capable and willing to serve. She also proposed measures such as establishing women's health centres nationwide, but her broader conservative policies have damaged her support among women, polls show. So yeah, this is another example of the first female prime minister of a country who makes the kind of difference, in my opinion at least, that she is paying some sort of lip service to something you can understand as liberal feminism. She's talking about making the government more representative, I guess, of the population, talking about raising women into positions of power. She spoke about her own struggles with things like menopause, which you don't hear that much. You don't hear many older female politicians talk like that. So you can understand, I guess, why some women might be swayed just by that. And I feel like that happens a lot with this. If, you know, the first female prime minister in a country like Japan, which is, I guess, worse for women's rights in a lot of Western countries, and you can understand, I guess, why people support it. But at the same time, this first female politician is more far right than many of her predecessors in the party who've led the party and who've led the government, and is looking to be more xenophobic, more nationalistic, more militaristic. So what you're essentially getting is someone who might even tackle issues of gender inequality in Japan, for Japanese women probably exclusively, but they're still going to pursue a more fascist policy agenda. Now, people often say, when you say this about like India or other countries that have fascist leaders that don't actually lead a fascist system, these people aren't actually fascist. Yes, they are actually fascist. Like Donald Trump is actually a fascist, right? Just because he's in a system that isn't like explicitly looking like Germany in the 30s or Italy, these people are still fascist. But that's what we're getting now with the new era of woke fascism. Some lip service to liberal progressivism. But at the end of the day, when it comes to migrants, when it comes to privatization of economies, when it comes to the military, when it comes to all of these things, when it comes to supporting authoritarianism and being against free speech, it doesn't matter how much wokeness, how much liberal progressivism they pay lip service to, or even maybe in some sort of way pursue politically, they're still going to do all the other fascist shit as well. And another case study for this is, of course, someone who's become very acceptable because, again, they're a fascist working in a system that isn't completely fascist yet, like a totalitarian fascist system, is the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Now, I spoke about her in the past, someone who, when they were young, went to Campo Hobbit, which were these Lord of the Rings camps inspired by the teachings of Julius Evola. I have like multiple videos on this, and that's why people like her like Lord of the Rings, someone who in the past has said positive things about Mussolini, but since they become in power, I guess there's been some sort of odd revisionism around her, because breaking the trend with a lot of far-right politicians around Europe, Giorgia Meloni actually supports NATO. And when you support NATO and you're not one of these far-right politicians that is anti-NATO and wants closer ties with like Russia, for example, then the liberal establishment finds you perfectly acceptable. But let's talk about Giorgia Meloni as well, because this article from Women's Agenda in 2022 has quotes from Meloni talking about being the first woman to lead Italy. So Italy's first female prime minister, Giorgia Meloni, praised several women in her first speech to Parliament on Tuesday, acknowledging the vital legacy they have left behind in breaking the heavy glass ceiling. Among the many burdens I feel weighing on my shoulders today, there is also that of being the first woman to head the government in this nation. When I dwell on this fact, I inevitably find myself thinking about the responsibility I have towards all women who face difficulties in asserting their talent or the right to see their daily sacrifices appreciated. But I also think with reverence of those who, through their example, have built the planks of the ladder that today allows me to climb and break the heavy glass ceiling placed over our heads. In her 17-minute-long address, Meloni, 45, who was sworn in on Saturday, listed the women who built the ladder that allowed her to break the glass ceiling. They included pioneering educator Maria Montessori, author and war correspondent Oriana Felici, anti-fascism resistance leader Tina Anselmi, and the first European woman to command the International Space Station, Elisabetta Casellati. To them, I say thank you for having demonstrated the value of Italian women, as I hope to be able to do too. Meloni, who called herself an underdog, rose from the margins of Italy's political scene to become the leader of the far-right party Brothers of Italy, a political group with neo-fascist roots. So, of course, when you are listening to far-right politicians, you tend to not take them at face value, but even if she was being serious about these Italian heroes of her, including like anti-fascist resistance leaders, creating the ladder so she could break the glass ceiling, at the same time, like so many minorities who become leaders of countries that have been hostile to them having power, they kick the ladder from behind them. That is literally the UK government in a nutshell, especially the Tories. You have multiple politicians in positions of power from like South Asian backgrounds who then enact really xenophobic policies that would mean their own parents couldn't have come to the UK, and they don't give a shit, right? So Meloni is another one of them, as are many of these politicians who are far-right women. They stand on the backs of so many progressive people, left-wing people, especially women as well, who have paved the way for them to actually become leaders in a system that is still very patriarchal. And then they get through the glass ceiling and they kick the ladder behind them, because Meloni, like these others, is helping people who don't see women as equal, who see a place for women just in the home as a wife and mother. And although she's their leader, the Italian politicians and movements that support her don't want more women leaders, right? They might support you as like a token figure they can use to attack their enemies with. We see that with the AfD in Germany, who sponsor anti-BDS bills so they can attack the left as anti-Semites, despite the fact they are deeply anti-Semitic themselves. This isn't something new, but they do that, and the Tories did this as well, to be like, well, we've had female leaders, we've had South Asian leaders, what about you other parties? We're the more progressive ones. If you love identity politics. If you love progressive Western values, why don't you support us? And I read an interesting article about Meloni as well by on this blog called Fascism blog by a PhD student called Virginia Lem. She talks about a term called abusive feminism. And it sounds very much like my definition for something like woke fascism. This is an article from August. So it says, Rosalind Dixon, I think he's like a law professor who specializes on like women's rights in law and stuff. So explicitly refers to the Italian government as an example of abusive feminism. So the concept of abusive feminism proves useful in interrogating the true nature of Meloni's government. Dixon defines abusive feminism as the use of feminist language and symbols by authoritarian or illiberal regimes to legitimize oppressive practices. These regimes invoke the rhetoric of gender equality and women's rights, particularly the notion of descriptive representation, while simultaneously undermining substantive feminist values, or what Dixon refers to as feminism's minimum core. The presence of a woman leader does not equal a substantive feminist agenda, and in Meloni's government, only 6 out of 24 ministers are women. And she also renamed the Ministry for Equal Opportunities in the Family to the Ministry of Family, Birth Rates and Equal Opportunities, underlying a woman's maternal role. And just like one example of someone like Meloni, like both pushing the ladder behind her and attacking women's rights. So Italy's law number 194 of 1978 guarantees access to voluntary termination of pregnancies. The law already allowed for third sector associations to participate in counselling centres for different purposes, but in April 2024, during proceedings to convert a decree law implementing Italy's National Recovery and Resilience Plan, the Brothers of Italy, under Meloni's leadership, introduced an amendment and asked a confidence vote to it, and the amendment allowed regional administrations, when organising counselling centre services, to make use without additional public expense of third sector organisations with qualified experiences in supporting motherhood. As feminist groups and the opposition parties highlighted, this provision opens the door to pro-life organisations operating within public counselling centres, undermining the fundamental mission of these services, the protection of women's health and their right to self-determination. The amendment was incorporated in the law and represents a further attack on women's sexual and reproductive rights. Those rights were already under threat in Italy. So yeah, Meloni is a perfect example of a female fascist leader who will pay lip service to like liberal feminism to maybe get women's votes and stuff like that, but at the same time is part of a party that's very hostile to a woman's role to participate equally in society, and that is just like one example of it. But generally, if you are part of a fascist ruling party and you have all these other members of the government who are men with very, very far-right beliefs and far-right views on what a woman is, the definition of a woman, and what her role is, then you are pushing Italy back in like a bad direction, just as the new female Prime Minister of Japan is probably likely to do, even if she does make some improvements for women's rights in terms of, like, let's say, representation in the government and maybe women's health services and stuff like that. So now let's get to, I guess, the final boss of this. So let's get to the leader of the AfD, Germany's Nazi party, and I have no problems calling them that. See their propaganda online, it's just Nazi propaganda. The leader of the AfD in Germany is Alice Weidel. She's not only a female leader of a fascist party, she's also gay and is actually in a gay interracial relationship. And yes, they are the final boss. Not only do they use their identity to be like, well, the AfD is actually not sexist because I'm the leader, she also uses her identity as part of the LGBT community to defend them on those grounds as well, but also uses all of it to attack migrants, saying, I support fascism because migrants are a threat to women's rights and to LGBT rights. So let's get into this. So Alex Weidel, The Lesbian Against Gay Rights, published in 2017 on Digit magazine by Rosalie Vartan. On April 22nd, 2017, at the AfD party conference in Cologne, Alex Weidel gave a speech in which for the first time she addressed being gay. In this speech, she gave an answer to the question that she often gets, that why, as a lesbian woman, is she a member of a homophobic party? However, she is sarcastic in her answer. The fact that she is a lesbian and a member is a political message because it is used to state that she and her party cannot be homophobic. The answer she gave is short, and it's that the AfD will provide safety for LGBT people by tackling the immigration problem because, according to her, Violence against gay people comes mainly from Muslim gangs. During the speech, she gives examples of violent acts by Muslims against gay people in Germany and uses these to provide evidence that a compromise between Islamists, as she calls them, and the German people, which Angela Merkel and her party are pleading for, is not possible. After announcing she is gay on stage, she continues, "I have waited, but it seems no one is leaving. This is surprising because AfD is a homophobic party. I read that daily." AfD party is against gay marriage as well, which she mentions, and she says, "The gays and lesbians in this country will not care at the end of the day whether their relationship is a registered life partnership or a marriage when they do not dare go out on the street arm in arm because they're scared of Muslim gangs." And she also tweeted another time that marriage for all debates while millions of Muslims illegally immigrate to Germany is a joke. So there you have fascist feminism's final boss. Someone who uses their entire identity as someone who, like, literally isn't accepted in the fascist worldview to help fascism flourish in Germany and to help this fascist political party get in power. And one day she might be the new leader of Germany as well, who's explicitly more fascist than the other two we've spoken about, and is not only just a woman, but is a gay woman in an interracial relationship. And all I would say to, obviously, like a lot of these politicians is, I'm sure there's an element of them that will be safe in terms of they're so privileged and they have the political power, probably a lot of them are wealthy, that maybe they will be safe from the fascism they are helping to create in their own countries. But for a lot of them, they weren't. Like, in terms of Germany's example, the leader of the brown shirts was gay. And although historians debate the leading reason of why he was killed, it's pretty clear that part of the reason, at least, he was killed by the Nazis was because he was gay. But yes, this guy tried to build fascism in Germany and they killed him. And in his view, Ernst Röhm, what he thought, do you know what he thought the gay men could be in fascist Germany? Well, they couldn't obviously have children because they wouldn't be having wives and they couldn't do that. So he imagined himself as like an ancient Theban warrior, and the gay people in Nazi Germany could be like the Thebans or the Spartans. I forget which example he used. And they could be like some sort of like military vanguard for the Nazi party. And obviously completely wrong and delusional. But I think these female leaders of these fascist parties obviously imagine a place of them. And they try and balance the recognition of, I'm only here because of feminism, but also I hate feminism at the same time. And they try and like thread the needle of like, I hate feminism, gender ideology, I hate LGBT rights, but also we need to make women more equal. And they might have convinced themselves they can change the conversation. And in the long term, there can be some sort of fascism they support, which has some sort of equality for women baked in. But there are so many people in the AfD who are just using that Alice Weidel, and they will abandon her and feed her to the wolves when it is convenient. They don't actually want her as the leader. The same with Meloni, the same with Takaishi. I don't think any of the people, most of the people in those parties do not want these women leaders. And for them, it's just a useful political tool, and it's a good marketing tool for a lot of them to get more votes from women based on identity politics, but it's not going to last a long time. But it's just another little element of like woke fascism, as I call it, using liberal identity politics to enact fascism and to defend like really xenophobic rhetoric. So that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.